Captain, the radar is broken. Captain Hitomi Soichiro didn't look up from his charts. It's been showing ghosts all night. Lieutenant Yamada pointed at the screen anyway. Sir, this contact isn't fading. It's holding steady. 30 kilometers east.
Multiple echoes approaching.
30 kilometers is nothing in this weather. If there was an American battleship that close, we'd know. Soichiro straightened his back, aching from 18 hours on the bridge. The Americans hunt during the day. At night, the ocean is ours. But sir, we survived yesterday, Yamada. We survived those carriers, those destroyers, that insanity off Samar. Soichiro's voice hardened. Today we make San Bernardino. Tomorrow we repair. Next week we fight again. That's the plan. Stop jumping at shadows. Yamada bowed slightly, turned back to his station, but his eyes kept drifting to the radar screen where the contact grew stronger, clearer, impossible to ignore. The radar operator, Ensign Tanaka, barely 20 years old, stared at the blip. His hand hovered over the intercom. Should he report it again? The captain had said no. Orders were orders. He didn't report it. 2 minutes later, his decision wouldn't matter. Contact? Ensign Robert Chen's voice cracked on the word. His finger jabbed at 3 green blips moving across the radar screen like ghosts trying to escape hell. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Williams was behind him in 2 steps. You sure? 3 targets, bearing 270, range 33,000 yards. Chen's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat on the console. They're real, sir. Moving 12 knots in formation. Williams grabbed the phone. His mouth was dry. Bridge CIC, surface contacts, 3 large targets bearing west. 19 miles away. The Japanese ships were running blind into the darkness, thinking they were safe, thinking the night would protect them. They were wrong. Bridge. Same moment. Captain John McCree caught the phone before the second ring. Around him, the bridge crew held their breath. How certain are we? Chen's the best radar operator in the fleet, sir. If he says they're real, they're real. McCree looked at the windows. Saw only black. No moon, no stars, no enemy. Just his reflection staring back, a ghost deciding the fate of other ghosts. Lieutenant Morrison. Sir? James Morrison stepped from the chart table, his coffee forgotten, his exhaustion gone. Your assessment. Morrison chose his words like bullets. If we let them go, sir, they'll kill Americans tomorrow, maybe a lot of Americans. And if we fire blind, if the radar's wrong, then we waste 6 shells. Morrison met his captain's eyes. But if it's right, we make history. McCree was silent for 5 seconds that felt like drowning. Then he picked up the phone. Fire Control Bridge, wake Commander Wade. Tell him we have work. Fire Control Center, 0448 hours. Thomas Wade was already awake, already moving, already hating what he knew was coming. Range. His voice was flat as Kansas. Fire Controlman. First Class David Murphy's hands danced across the Mark 8 fire control computer, 12 tons of gears and mathematics that cost more than a factory. 32,800 yards. Target bearing 273, speed 13 knots. Solution computing. Wade stared at the machine. During testing at Chesapeake Bay, this computer had hit target barges at 23 miles. Perfect math, perfect shots, perfect everything. But target barges didn't have men inside them. Solution valid. Computer confirms valid firing solution, sir. Wind compensated. Earth rotation compensated. Drift compensated. Murphy looked up. His face was pale. The machine says we can hit them. The machine. Wade's laugh was sharp. I joined the Navy to be a warrior, Murphy, not a button pusher trusting a calculator. Sir, men can't see 19 miles in the dark. No, but men die when calculators are wrong. Wade picked up the phone to the bridge. His hand was steady, his voice wasn't. Bridge fire control. We have a firing solution. I need you to understand we've never done this before. Not in combat. Not in the dark. Not blind. McCree's voice came back calm. Do you trust the math, Commander? Wade looked at the computer. At Murphy. At the numbers that said 6 shells would fly 19 miles through darkness and hit steel moving at 13 knots. Yes, sir. I trust the math. Then that's enough. Stand by to fire on my command. Wade hung up, stared at his hands. They were shaking. Turret 2, main deck. 0449 hours. You heard the man, Chief Gunner's mate William Bull Harrison's voice could strip paint. Powder bags, move like you mean it. His crew exploded into motion. 18-year-olds from farms and cities, boys who'd joined for adventure and steady pay, now loading shells that weighed more than they did. Seaman Michael Torres guided a powder bag into the breach. His hands were shaking. Chief, how do we know we'll hit anything? We don't. Then why? Because the captain said fire, and we're not paid to ask philosophical questions. Ram that bag. But the question hung in the cramped, powder-stinking darkness. Gunner's mate second class. Robert Palmer spoke up, his voice tight. My brother was on the Gambier Bay, Chief. She went down yesterday at Samar. If those Japanese ships get away, they won't. Harrison slammed the breech closed. The sound was final as a coffin lid. Not today, not on my watch. Turret 2, ready? The intercom crackled. All turrets report ready. Stand by for fire order. In the silence, someone whispered a prayer. Someone else told him to shut up. Torres laughed, high, nervous breaking. Harrison looked at his boys, saw their fear, saw their trust, saw the exact moment when training killed instinct, and they became parts of the machine. Listen up. His voice was quieter now. Whatever happens out there, you did your job. The rest is math and God, and I don't know which one scares me more. Chen watched the blips. 3 ships running through the dark, racing for safety they'd never reach. Sir. His voice was small. They don't know we're here, do they? Williams put his hand on the ensign's shoulder. No. They think they're safe. Should I? Chen swallowed. Should I feel bad about that? Williams looked at the radar screen, thought about Gambier Bay and all those carriers that burned yesterday. Thought about the American sailors who'd died fighting ships they could see, enemies they could face. Ask me after we win the war, Chen. Fire control. Final seconds. Wade's finger hovered over the firing key. Cold steel. His fingertip left sweat on the button. Around him, the mechanical computer hummed its certainty. Perfect math, perfect calculations, perfect death. Commander. Murphy's voice was soft. We're ready. Wade closed his eyes, saw his father, a farmer who trusted soil and sun and the work of his hands. What would the old man say about this? About killing by calculator. About war, where courage didn't matter, only technology. The phone rang. Fire control bridge. You are authorized to engage. Fire when ready. Wade opened his eyes. In his chest, his heart was a hammer. One press, that's all. One movement, and men would die 19 miles away. Men he'd never see. Men whose names he'd never know. He pressed the key. Firing. The world ended. 9 16-inch guns fired. Torres screamed but couldn't hear himself. The deck punched his chest like a fist. His teeth rattled, blood in his mouth from biting his tongue. Reload. Harrison's lips moved, but there was no sound, just ringing, just the absence of everything except pain. The recoil threw Harrison against the bulkhead despite his bracing. 4 feet of controlled violence, 100 tons of steel slamming backward. The muzzle blast killed fish for 100 yards, cracked paint on bulkheads, and left 94 men deaf and shaking. Torres's hands moved automatically. Swab, load, ram, close. The dance of destruction performed by muscle memory, because his brain had stopped working. In Turret 1, Seaman First Class, Jackson threw up in a bucket. Nobody laughed. Half the crew looked green. You okay? Jackson wiped his mouth. We just killed people. Maybe. Shells still flying. I didn't see them, didn't see anything. That's the point, Jackson. I know, but... His hands shook. My dad fought in the Great War, told me about looking at Germans before he shot them, said their faces haunted him for 30 years. He stared at the breach. This doesn't feel like fighting, feels like murder. Nobody answered, because maybe he was right. The shells fly. 97 seconds. 6 shells climbed into darkness, rose almost vertical at first, pushed by 500 pounds of burning powder. Then, gravity bent their trajectory into an arc that would terminate 19 miles away. They climbed to 47,000 feet, higher than mountains, higher than most aircraft, high enough that the air was thin and cold and the stars would be visible if anyone could see them. But nobody could. They were invisible, silent, faster than their own sound. The Japanese ships below had no warning, no alert, no chance. Soichiro was drinking cold tea when the ocean exploded. The first shell hit 50 yards off the port bow. The waterspout rose 200 feet, a white column that seemed to touch the clouds. The sound arrived a split second later, and Soichiro's teacup shattered on the deck. What? The second shell punched through Kumano's armor belt amidships, punched through 3 inches of steel like it was paper, continued inward through a passageway, through a bulkhead, into the forward engine room. Then it detonated. 40 pounds of explosive turned the engine room into an oven. 12 men vaporized instantly. Steam lines ruptured, spraying superheated vapor that cooked flesh from bones. The forward turbines seized. Speed dropped. Lights flickered and died. Report. Soichiro grabbed the railing. His hands were shaking. What hit us? Where is the enemy? His executive officer was bleeding from the ears. No aircraft, no torpedoes, nothing on the horizon. A third shell struck the water just aft. Fragments peppered the stern, shredding radar antennas. Ensign Tanaka's head snapped back, his blood spraying across the console he'd been watching all night. Then silence. Terrible ringing silence broken only by screaming from below, and the sound of water flooding into Kumano's hull. Soichiro stared into the darkness. His ship was dying. His men were burning. And he couldn't see the enemy, couldn't hear them, couldn't fight them. Did anyone see muzzle flashes? No, sir. Aircraft? Nothing. Captain, the sky is empty. Yamada's voice was shaking. Sir, what kind of weapon? I don't know. Soichiro's whisper was lost in the chaos. I don't know. And that was more terrifying than the shells themselves. USS Iowa. CIC. 90 seconds after firing. Radar confirms impact. Chen's voice was mechanical. Target 1 is slowing. Possible fires. Target 2 and 3 are increasing speed. They're running, sir. Williams picked up the phone. Bridge CIC. Confirmed hits on lead target. Remaining targets evading. McCree's voice came back quiet. Prepare for second salvo. Williams looked at Chen. The kid's face was pale, his shirt dark with sweat despite the cool air. We killed them, Chen whispered. Just numbers on a screen and we killed them. Yeah. Williams didn't know what else to say. Get used to it, Ensign. This is what the rest of your life looks like. Morrison stood beside McCree, watching the plot. The Japanese ships were running now, panicked, desperate. Do we fire again, sir? McCrea stared at the darkness, at the ocean that had just learned a new lesson about death. No, secure from general quarters, resume formation course. Sir? Morrison was confused. We could finish them. We already have, Lieutenant. McCree turned from the windows. Those ships will tell stories tonight, About American battleships that see in the dark, kill from beyond the horizon, strike without warning or mercy. His voice was tired. Fear spreads faster than shells, Morrison. Let them run. Let them tell everyone what happened here. Harrison's crew sat against the bulkheads exhausted. Nobody spoke. The turret smelled like cordite and fear. Torres broke the silence. "Chief, did we hit them?" "Yeah." "Did they see us coming?" "No." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Is that fair?" Harrison looked at the kid, 18 years old, still believed in honor and rules and fighting like men instead of machines. "Fair." Harrison laughed, bitter, exhausted. "My grandfather fought at Manila Bay in '98, ships so close you could throw rocks. He saw the men he killed, looked them in the eyes. He stood, joints popping. Now we kill people from 19 miles away, in the dark, using computers." He opened the breech to inspect the barrel. "Fair doesn't win wars anymore, Torres. Technology does. Math does. Machines do. But we're still the ones who pulled the trigger. Are we?" Harrison looked at his hands. "Or did the machine pull the trigger and we just happened to be standing here?" Nobody had an answer for that, as gray light broke over the Philippine Sea. Iowa steamed back toward the carrier task force. Coffee was made, the mess hall opened, men showered and joked and wrote letters home. Some would mention the night's action. Fired at enemy ships. Scored hits. Successful engagement. None would say they'd killed men they never saw. None would admit they'd solved an equation and called it war. In the CIC, Chen sat alone staring at the empty radar screen. Williams found him there an hour later. "You okay, Ensign?" "I keep thinking about them, sir. The men on that ship. Did they have time to be scared? Did they understand what killed them?" "Probably not." "Does that make it better or worse?" Williams sat down. He'd been asking himself the same question for an hour. 20 years ago, my father fought in France, told me about killing men close enough to smell, looking into their eyes. He said it haunted him. Williams gestured at the radar. "Now we kill with math, with machines. Is it more humane?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Is it less honorable?" "Maybe that too. But it's the future, Chen. And we're the ones who built it. How do you live with it?" "By remembering the alternative is worse. Those Japanese ships killed Americans yesterday at Samar. Men with faces, names, families." William stood. "We didn't start this war, but we'll end it, with radar, computers, every technological advantage we can build. Even if it makes us monsters." Williams was quiet. Then, even then. 19 miles away, oil burned on the water. Debris floated. Men screamed in the darkness, drowning in a sea that didn't care about honor or courage or fighting fair. On Iowa, 94 men in 3 turrets tried not to think about what they'd done. The age of naval chivalry had ended with 6 shells fired into darkness. What replaced it was efficient, precise, terrifying, and absolutely unstoppable. The news reached Tokyo 3 days later. Not through official channels, not through radio intercepts or intelligence reports, through survivors, through men pulled from the water off Samar, who whispered stories that made admirals go pale. They fired from the darkness. We never saw them. The shells just appeared. November 2nd, 1944. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters. Tokyo. Admiral Soemu Toyoda sat in his office reading the survivor reports for the 3rd time. His hands weren't steady anymore. 59 years old, veteran of 2 wars. He'd commanded destroyers in the Russo-Japanese war cruisers in China, and now he commanded a navy that was learning it was obsolete. "How far?" he asked his intelligence officer, Commander Nakamura. "The survivors estimate 30 kilometers, sir, maybe more." 30 kilometers. Toyota set down the report. And they hit Kumano on the second salvo. First salvo, sir. Multiple hits. The ship went down in less than 30 minutes. Toyota stood, walked to the window. Outside Tokyo was preparing for another bombing raid. Blackout curtains being hung. Air raid sirens being tested. A city learning to live in fear. Do we have anything that can shoot that far? Our Yamato class can theoretically engage at 25 kilometers, sir, but not in darkness, not without visual confirmation. And the Americans can... Yes, sir, they have radar fire control. Their computers calculate everything wind-Earth rotation target movement. They don't need to see the target. Toyota was silent for a long moment. Then we're not fighting a war anymore, Commander. We're being hunted. Sir, hunters need to see their prey. What do you call it when the prey can't even see the hunter? Nakamura had no answer. Toyota sat back down, picked up his pen, started writing orders that he knew were pointless. Orders to develop countermeasures to technology they didn't have. Orders to train crews for tactics that wouldn't work. Orders that were really just paperwork. Documentation of defeat. Sir, there's something else. Nakamura placed another report on the desk. We've received similar reports from 4 other engagements in the past week. American battleships firing at extreme range. Multiple hits. No visual contact. 4 engagements. Yes, sir. They're systematically destroying our remaining heavy units. And we can't fight back because we can't see them. Toyota read the reports. His face went gray. USS Massachusetts had sunk a cruiser off Mindoro. 32 kilometers. Night engagement. USS Washington had destroyed 2 destroyers near Leyte. 28 kilometers. Dawn attack through rain. USS South Dakota had crippled a battleship off Lingayen. 35 kilometers. Overcast conditions. The pattern was clear. The Americans weren't just winning, they were demonstrating, proving that Japanese ships could be destroyed at will from distances that made courage meaningless. They're breaking our spirit, Toyota said quietly. Sir, this isn't about sinking ships, Commander. They could do that with aircraft. This is about proving we're helpless. That all our training, all our warrior spirit, all our belief in Bushido means nothing against their technology. He looked at Nakamura. How do you maintain morale when your men know they can die without warning, without even seeing the enemy? I don't know, sir. Neither do I. Toyota stood again, walked to the wall where a painting of Admiral Togo hung the hero of Tsushima, the man who'd defeated the Russian fleet in 1905 through courage and tactical brilliance. Togo had seen his enemies, had maneuvered his fleet to cross the T, had won through skill and daring. Togo wouldn't recognize this war, Toyota whispered. Hell, I don't recognize it. Behind him, Nakamura cleared his throat. Sir, the Emperor has requested a briefing on the naval situation. What should I tell him? The truth, sir. The truth. Toyota laughed. Bitter, exhausted. The truth is, we've already lost. We just don't know it yet. The truth is, American industry builds ships faster than we can sink them. American technology sees further than our eyes can reach. American mathematics kills more efficiently than our courage can defend. He turned from the painting. But I can't tell the Emperor that. So I'll tell him we're developing countermeasures, that we're adapting our tactics, that the spirit of our sailors remains unbroken. And is it, sir, unbroken? Toyota looked at the survivor reports, at the desperate words of men who'd watched their ships die from invisible enemies. Men who'd jumped into the water not knowing if more shells would fall. Men who'd stopped believing that courage mattered. No, Commander, it's breaking, one radar-guided shell at a time. Meanwhile, 7,000 miles away, the American factory that made those shells was running 3 shifts a day. November 5th, 1944. Naval Gun Factory, Washington, D.C., 0600 hours. Mary Chen. No relation to Ensign Robert Chen aboard Iowa, clocked in for the morning shift. 24 years old. Her husband was in France. Her brother was on a destroyer somewhere in the Pacific. She hadn't heard from either in 3 weeks. Morning, Mary. Susan Rodriguez, her shift partner, was already at their lathe. Heard about Iowa. What about it? It hit a Jap cruiser at 20 miles. In the dark. First salvo. Mary stopped. 20 miles? That's what the foreman said. They're saying it's because our shells are so perfect the computers can calculate exactly where they'll land. Susan smiled. Tired but proud. We did that, Mary. You and me and every girl in this factory. We made it possible. Mary looked at the lathe, at the half-finished armor-piercing shell mounted in the chuck. 2 700 pounds of high-carbon steel machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. She'd been making these for 18 months, 10 shells a day, 6 days a week. Over 4,000 shells with her hands on them. How many people do you think I've killed? Mary asked quietly. Susan's smile faded. Don't think like that. Why not? It's true. Every shell we make kills someone. Japanese sailors. Men with families. Men who are trying to kill your brother. Men who bombed Pearl Harbor. Men who... Susan stopped, took a breath. Look, I think about it too. Every night. But then I remember that my cousin died on the Arizona, and my neighbor's son is in a POW camp in the Philippines. And suddenly I don't feel so bad about making these shells perfect. Mary started the lathe. The shell began to spin. She adjusted the cutting tool. Metal shavings curled away like silver ribbons. Each pass of the tool removed exactly 0.003 inches. Not 0.002, not 0.004, exactly 0.003. Because that's what the specifications demanded. That's what perfection required. You know what scares me, Mary said over the machine noise. It's how good I've gotten at this. How I don't think about what these shells do anymore. I just think about the tolerances, the surface finish, the weight specifications. I've turned killing into craftsmanship. Is that so wrong? I don't know. Maybe. Mary checked her micrometer, adjusted the tool. But when the war is over, how do I go back? How do I stop thinking about precision and start thinking about people again? Susan didn't answer. Around them, the factory hummed with activity. 3,000 workers on this shift alone. Making shells. Making powder. Making death as efficiently as American industry knew how. In the inspection department, 60-year-old Frank Morrison, father of Lieutenant James Morrison aboard Iowa, though neither knew the other's role in the war, examined finished shells with calipers and gauges. His son had written last month. Brief letter. Couldn't say where he was or what he was doing, just that he was safe and thinking of home. Frank held a shell nose up to the light, looked for imperfections in the machining, found none. This shell was perfect, would fly straight, would hit exactly where the computer said it would kill efficiently. He stamped it approved and moved to the next one. Frank, his supervisor Tom Chen, father of Ensign Robert Chen, though again neither knew, approached with a clipboard. We're behind quota. Need you to speed up inspection. Can't speed up. Each shell takes 5 minutes minimum. Corporate wants 8 minutes each. Then corporate can come down here and miss the imperfections that'll kill American sailors when these shells explode in the breach. Frank set down his calipers. I've been doing this for 30 years, Tom. You want it fast or you want it right? Tom sighed. He'd had this argument with 6 inspectors today. Right. But we're under pressure from Washington. They're saying the Pacific offensive is accelerating. Every shell matters. Every shell always mattered. Frank picked up the next shell, started his inspection. My son's on a battleship somewhere. Every time I approve one of these, I imagine it's the one that'll save his life, or end someone else's. So yeah, it matters. And yeah, it takes 5 minutes. Tom nodded. Walked away. Left Frank to his work. The old man didn't know that 2 weeks ago a shell he'd inspected, lot number 44, 3382, manufactured in July, had flown 19 miles across the Philippine Sea and punched through the engine room of IJN Kumano. Didn't know that his precision had killed 12 men instantly. Didn't know that his son had watched the radar track that shell to its target. If he had known, would he have felt proud? Horrified, both. He never found out. The war kept secrets. The factory kept producing. And the connection between father and son remained invisible, like the radar waves that guided the shells they both helped create. Back in Tokyo, Admiral Toyota was learning just how wide the technological gap had become. November 8, 1944. Naval Technical Research Institute. Yokosuka. "Show me," Toyota said. The chief engineer, Dr. Yamamoto, no relation to the famous admiral, led him into a dim room filled with experimental equipment. In the center sat Japan's most advanced radar set, copied from German designs, modified with Japanese components. "This is our Type 22 surface search radar," Yamamoto explained. "Maximum effective range 12 kilometers, in ideal conditions." Ideal. Clear weather. Calm seas, large targets. Yamamoto adjusted a dial. The screen showed static. In rain or rough seas, effective range drops to 6 kilometers, sometimes less. And the Americans? Their SC-2 radar has an effective range of 35 kilometers. In any weather, their newer SK sets can see even further. Toyota stared at the screen, at the fuzzy, unreliable image that represented Japan's best hope for technological parity. "Why can't we build better resources, sir? The Americans have access to refined materials we don't. Their manufacturing tolerances are tighter. Their electrical components are more reliable. And..." Yamamoto hesitated. "And what? They have a culture of innovation that we lack. Their engineers are encouraged to experiment, to fail, to try new approaches. Our engineers are expected to perfect existing designs, to honor tradition, to..." He stopped, realized what he was saying. "To follow orders without question," Toyota finished, "even when the orders are based on outdated assumptions." "Yes, sir." Toyota looked around the room, at the handful of engineers working with equipment that was already obsolete compared to what the Americans had deployed 2 years ago. "How many engineers do we have working on radar?" 47, sir." "And the Americans?" "Intelligence estimates over 4,000, with dedicated research facilities, unlimited budgets." 4,000. Toyota felt something break inside him. Not hope he'd lost that weeks ago, something deeper. The belief that effort mattered, that fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantage, that Bushido meant anything against industrial superiority. "We can't win this, can we?" he asked quietly. Yamamoto looked at his admiral, saw a man who'd dedicated his life to the Navy, who'd believed in Japanese exceptionalism, who'd thought courage and training could defeat any enemy. "No, sir, not anymore, not against this." "Then what do? We fight, we die with honor, we demonstrate that the Japanese spirit is unbreakable even in defeat. And our sailors, the boys dying in the dark from shells they never see coming, what do we tell them? That their deaths are honorable?" Yamamoto had no answer. Toyota walked to the window. Outside, Yokosuka Harbor was full of ships being repaired. Ships damaged by air attacks, by submarine torpedoes, by those long-range American guns that killed from beyond sight. The fleet was dying. The war was lost. Everyone knew it. But no one could say it. Back aboard Iowa, the psychological toll was becoming apparent. November 12, 1944. USS Iowa, Medical Bay. "Tell me about the dreams," the ship's psychiatrist, Commander Douglas, said. Seaman Torres sat on the examination table. Hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks. Dark circles under his eyes. Hands that shook when he held his coffee. "It's always the same," Torres said quietly. "I'm loading the shell, ramming it into the breech, and I can see through the steel, through the shell casing. I can see the explosive inside. And suddenly, I'm inside it too, traveling with it, flying through the air. And I land on this ship, this Japanese ship, and I see their faces right before the shell explodes. I see them realize what's happening. I see them try to run. And then, he stopped, swallowed hard. Then what? Douglas asked gently. Then I wake up. But for a second, just a second, I can still smell them burning. Douglas made notes. Torres was the fourth crew member this week with similar symptoms. Combat fatigue, the Navy called it. Shell shock in the last war. Now they had a new term, operational exhaustion. You did your job, seaman. You followed orders. You're not responsible for... Yes, I am. Torres looked up. His eyes were red. I pulled the lanyard. Well, not directly, but I loaded the shell that killed them. I'm part of the machine. Just because I can't see them die doesn't mean I didn't kill them. Would it be better if you could see them? I don't know, maybe. At least then it would feel real. Feel like war instead of factory work. Douglas closed his notebook. I can give you something to help you sleep, and I'm recommending you be reassigned to duties that don't involve the guns. Will that help? Honestly, I don't know. This kind of warfare killing people you never see from distances they can't comprehend, we don't have protocols for this yet. We're making it up as we go. Are other guys having the same problems? Yes, more than you'd think, but most of them don't report it. They're afraid of being seen as weak. Torres laughed. Harsh. Weak? That's funny. We're killing people with computers and we're worried about looking weak. War doesn't make sense, seaman. It just is. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. 2 decks below Chen was having his own crisis. November 12, 1944, CIC, 2300 hours. Chen sat alone at his radar station. Night watch. Most of the equipment was on standby. The screen showed only their own task force green blips moving in formation across an empty ocean. Can't sleep either. Chen turned. Williams stood in the doorway. No, sir. Want to talk about it? Not really, but I probably should. Williams sat down. I've been doing this for 20 years, Chen. 13 years before radar existed. I remember when we aimed guns by looking through optical rangefinders. When hitting a target at 10 miles was considered exceptional shooting. When warfare had a human element. You miss it. Parts of it. The simplicity. The feeling that we were warriors instead of technicians. Williams looked at the radar screen. But I don't miss watching friends die because we couldn't shoot far enough, or fast enough, or accurately enough. Is that what we tell ourselves? That technology makes us better killers, so it's okay? I don't know if it's okay, but I know it's necessary. The Japanese started this war. We're ending it. If radar helps us do that with fewer American casualties, then I'll take it. Even if it costs us our humanity. Williams was quiet for a long moment. You know what I think? I think our humanity isn't defined by how we kill. It's defined by why, and whether we can live with ourselves after. He stood. Get some sleep, Ensign. That's an order. Yes, sir. But Chen didn't sleep. He sat at his station watching the empty screen, thinking about the men he'd helped kill. Wondering if they'd had families. If their children would grow up hating Americans. If creating more efficient ways to kill just meant creating more efficient ways to breed hatred. He didn't have answers. He only had his duty. And the growing suspicion that duty wasn't enough anymore. Across the Pacific in a survivor camp in the Philippines, Captain Soichiro was wrestling with similar thoughts. November 15, 1944. POW camp. Leyte. Soichiro sat in the mud, surrounded by other survivors from Kumano. 38 men out of a crew of 800. The rest were dead. Drowned. Burned. Killed by shells they never saw coming. Captain? Lieutenant Yamada approached. He'd lost weight. They all had. The Americans fed them rice, vegetables, occasionally meat, but it wasn't enough to replace what they'd lost. The interrogators want to speak with you again. About what? The attack. How we were sunk. They keep asking about the radar. Soichiro stood. His uniform was stained with oil and blood. He'd been wearing it for 3 weeks. What do they want to know? Everything. Range, accuracy. Whether we saw anything, whether we fought back. And what are you telling them? The truth. That we didn't see anything. That we couldn't fight what we couldn't see. That, Yamada's voice broke. That we were helpless. Soichiro put his hand on his officer's shoulder. We fought honorably, Lieutenant. We did everything right. We just fought an enemy that had evolved beyond honor. Beyond courage. Beyond everything we were taught mattered. Then what did matter, sir? Mathematics, technology, the cold efficiency of men who've learned to kill without feeling. Are you saying we deserve to lose? No. I'm saying we never had a chance. There's a difference. The interrogation room was small. Bare walls, a table, 2 chairs. An American intelligence officer sat across from Soichiro. Captain First Class Richard Warren, 35 years old, spoke decent Japanese, notebook full of questions. Captain Soichiro, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Did I have a choice? Warren smiled slightly. Not really, but I prefer to be polite. He opened his notebook. I want to understand what happened on the morning of October 24th, from your perspective. Why? You already know what happened. Your ships fired. Mine sank. What else matters? The details matter. How far away were we when you detected us? We didn't detect you. Your radar. Our radar showed static, ghosts. The operator thought it was atmospheric interference. Soichiro leaned forward. You want to know the truth, Captain? The truth is, we didn't believe you could hit us from that far away. We thought we were safe. We thought the night protected us. We were wrong. Did you see our muzzle flashes? No. Hear anything before impact? No. So the first indication you had that we were firing was when the shells hit? Yes. Soichiro's hands tightened into fists. One moment we were steaming west. Safe. The next moment my ship was dying, and I couldn't even see what killed it. Do you understand what that does to a man? To watch your crew die and not even be able to fight back. Warren wrote notes. His face was neutral, professional. For the record, USS Iowa fired from approximately 31,000 yards, 19 miles. The shells had a flight time of 97 seconds. 19 miles. Soichiro laughed. No humor in it. We used to think 10 miles was extreme range. 19 miles in darkness? That's not warfare. That's execution. Would you prefer we'd gotten closer? Given you a chance to fight? I'd prefer you'd never attacked at all. But yes, if you're going to kill me, at least let me see it coming. Let me die as a warrior instead of... He stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Instead of what? Instead of a target. A number on your radar screen. A problem for your computer to solve. Soichiro met Warren's eyes. You've turned war into mathematics, Captain. And maybe that makes you more efficient killers, but it makes you less human. Warren closed his notebook. With respect, Captain, we didn't start this war. We're just ending it the fastest way we can. If that requires technology instead of courage, so be it. Then I hope you can live with what you've become. Can you live with what you tried to do Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, China, the millions who died because your leaders thought you were superior? Soichiro had no answer to that. Because Warren was right. Japan had started this. Had believed their fighting spirit could overcome any obstacle. Had paid for that belief with hundreds of thousands of lives. We were wrong. Soichiro said quietly. About many things. But at least we believed in something beyond efficiency. We believed in honor, in courage, in the warrior's code. What do you believe in, Captain Warren? Besides mathematics? Warren stood. I believe in ending this war. I believe in bringing my men home alive. I believe in using every advantage we have. He walked to the door, stopped. And I believe that 20 years from now, someone will invent something even more efficient than radar-guided guns, and they'll use it without hesitation. Because that's what we do. We evolve. We adapt. We find better ways to kill each other. It's not noble. It's not honorable. But it's human. After Warren left, Soichiro sat alone in the interrogation room. Outside, he could hear American soldiers laughing, playing baseball, living their lives as if war was just another job. Maybe it was. Maybe that's what made them so good at it. They'd industrialized killing, made it efficient, removed the emotion that slowed down other armies, and maybe that's why they'd win. Not because they were braver, not because they were more honorable, but because they'd learned something Japan never could, that war wasn't about warriors anymore. It was about factories, about technology, about cold mathematics applied with ruthless efficiency. Soichiro closed his eyes, thought about his crew, about the boys who died in darkness, never knowing what hit them, about the families who'd received telegrams with no details, no explanation, just the fact of death. And he realized that whether Japan won or lost, the real casualty of this war was the idea that courage mattered. That honor meant anything. That there was dignity in combat. Those ideas had died on October 24th, along with 800 sailors, along with every assumption about what warfare meant. The age of the warrior was over. The age of the technician had begun. And even in defeat in the mud and hunger and shame of captivity, Soichiro understood that this was the more terrifying victory, not the conquest of nations, but the conquest of humanity itself. The transformation of killing from an act requiring courage into a process requiring only precision. The Americans hadn't just defeated Japan. They'd defeated the very idea that war required honor, and in the cold efficiency of their radar-guided shells, Soichiro saw the future a world where death came from machines instead of men, where courage was irrelevant, where the only thing that mattered was technological superiority. It was a future he was glad he wouldn't live to see fully realized. But it was coming. As inevitable as the shells that had destroyed his ship. As unstoppable as mathematics itself. But none of these philosophical debates changed what was happening in the machine shops and laboratories where the future was being built with slide rules and test firings. December 1st, 1944. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. 0800 hours. Dr. Robert Vannevar Bush stood in the observation bunker watching technicians prepare the test firing. 54 years old, head of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. The man who'd convinced Roosevelt that American scientists could win the war. "Is the equipment ready?" he asked. Lieutenant Colonel Howard Mitchell checked his clipboard. "Mark 8, fire control system fully operational, sir. Target barge positioned at 32,000 yards. Weather conditions ideal. And the new proximity fuse, installed in test rounds 3 through 5. We're expecting significant improvement in burst accuracy." Bush nodded. He'd spent 3 years developing this technology, radio proximity fuses, that could detonate shells at the optimal distance from a target even if the shell missed by dozens of feet. It was brilliant, revolutionary, and it would kill thousands more efficiently than any weapon before it. He tried not to think about that part. Begin test sequence. The 16-inch gun fired. Even from inside the bunker, the sound was overwhelming. Bush watched through binoculars as the shell arced across the gray December sky. 32,000 yards, 19 miles. The shell took 98 seconds to reach the target area. The proximity fuse worked perfectly. The shell detonated 40 feet above the target barge, showering it with fragments that shredded the wooden structure. "Direct hit," Mitchell reported. Fuse functioned exactly as designed. Again, I want 5 consecutive successful tests before we recommend fleet deployment. They fired again and again. All 5 test rounds performed flawlessly. Bush's mathematics had worked. His equations had turned theory into practice. His genius had made killing more efficient. He signed the approval forms and tried not to think about what those forms meant. Behind him, a young engineer named William Shockley, who would later co-invent the transistor, approached with his own clipboard. 24 years old, MIT graduate, brilliant mind focused entirely on making weapons work better. Dr. Bush, I've been running calculations on the Iowa engagement data from October. And the hit probability was remarkable. 6 shells fired 3 direct hits, 19 miles in darkness. That's a 50% hit rate under conditions that should have produced less than 5%. Shockley's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a man solving an elegant problem. If we can replicate that accuracy consistently, we could reduce ammunition expenditure by 60% while increasing target destruction by 40%. Bush looked at the young man, saw himself 20 years ago, brilliant, passionate, completely focused on the technical challenges while somehow missing the human cost. Mr. Shockley, do you know how many men died in that engagement? The Japanese cruiser intelligence estimates around 800 casualties, sir. 800 men, not statistics, not data points, men with families, with children who won't see their fathers again. Shockley blinked, confused. Yes, sir. But that's war. Isn't our job to make sure more of their men die than ours? Is it? Bush set down his binoculars. I used to think so. I used to believe that improving weapon efficiency was a moral good because it shortened wars. But lately I wonder if we're just getting better at killing. Not at winning, just at killing. I don't understand, sir. No, you probably don't. Not yet. Bush looked at the smoking remains of the target barge. But you will. Someday when someone uses your inventions in ways you never imagined, you'll understand that every improvement we make has consequences we can't predict. Are you saying we shouldn't improve our weapons? I'm saying we should remember that weapons kill people, real people, and that making weapons more efficient doesn't make killing more moral. It just makes it easier to forget what we're doing. Shockley left troubled by the conversation, but ultimately unconvinced. Bush watched him go and felt tired, old, haunted by the realization that he'd helped create something that couldn't be uncreated. The radar-guided fire control system would survive the war, would evolve, would become the foundation for precision-guided munitions, cruise missiles, drone strikes, would enable killing from ever greater distances with ever greater accuracy. And Bush would live long enough to see it all, long enough to wonder if his brilliance had made the world better or just more efficient at destroying itself. That same day aboard Iowa, the psychological toll was reaching a breaking point. December 1st, 1944, USS Iowa, Ship's Chapel, 1900 hours. Chaplain Robert Miller sat in the empty chapel reading letters. He'd received 43 this week. Crew members pouring out their souls on paper, confessing fears they couldn't speak aloud, asking questions that had no good answers. Torres's letter was on top. Father, I can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes I see faces, Japanese faces. I've never actually seen them. I've never been close enough to see any enemy soldier, but I imagine them. I imagine the men on that cruiser, what they were thinking in the seconds before the shell hit, whether they had time to pray, whether they knew they were about to die. I loaded that shell, Father. My hands touched the metal that killed them. Does that make me a murderer? The Navy says I'm a hero. My mother writes that she's proud, but I feel like I'm drowning and no one can see it because I'm doing it from the inside out. Miller set down the letter. He'd been a chaplain for 12 years, had counseled men through death, loss, fear, anger. But this was different. These men weren't struggling with what they'd seen. They were struggling with what they'd done while seeing nothing, How do you grant absolution for killing you couldn't prevent because you were part of a machine too large to resist? The chapel door opened. Chen entered, hesitated when he saw Miller. "Sorry, Chaplain. Didn't know you were here." "Come in, Ensign. I was just reading." Miller gestured to the pew beside him. "Want to talk?" Chen sat, silent for a long moment. "Do you believe in God, Chaplain?" "Yes. Though some days I wonder if he believes in us anymore. Does he forgive us for what we're doing?" "What do you think we're doing?" "We're killing people we can't see, from distances they can't comprehend, using technology that reduces human lives to radar blips and ballistic calculations." Chen looked at his hands. "I'm good at it, Chaplain. Really good. I can read a radar screen better than anyone else in CIC. Can track multiple targets simultaneously. Can call firing solutions that kill efficiently, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I'm starting not to feel it anymore. The first time we fired I was sick, couldn't eat for 2 days, kept thinking about the men we'd killed. But now," Chen laughed, bitter, "now I just watch the screen, track the targets, call the range. It's just data, just numbers. I've turned killing into paperwork." Miller was quiet. He'd heard similar confessions from bombardiers, artillery spotters, submarine commanders, men who killed from distance, men who never saw the results of their actions except as intelligence reports and casualty estimates. "Do you want to feel it?" Miller asked. "The killing, would that make it better or worse?" "I don't know, but at least then I'd know I was still human, that I hadn't become just another component in the machine." "You're asking the wrong question, Ensign. The question isn't whether you feel it. The question is whether you'd stop even if you could." Chen looked at Miller. Understanding dawning. Horrible understanding. "No, I wouldn't stop. Because if I did, someone else would die. Maybe Americans, maybe my friends, maybe Lieutenant Morrison or Commander Williams or Chief Harrison." He swallowed hard. "So I'll keep doing it. I'll keep turning people into numbers, and numbers into corpses, and I'll try to live with that. But don't ask me to believe God forgives it." "Why not?" "Because if God forgives this, then anything can be forgiven. And if anything can be forgiven, then nothing matters. And I need to believe that something matters, even if I can't figure out what." Miller had no answer. He'd studied theology for years. Could quote scripture. Could explain doctrine. But none of it helped with the fundamental question Chen was asking. How do you maintain your humanity while participating in industrial-scale killing? He didn't know. He only knew that they had to try. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the implications of American technological superiority were becoming impossible to ignore. December 8, 1944. Imperial Palace. Tokyo. 1400 hours. Emperor Hirohito sat in his private study reading Admiral Toyoda's latest report. The emperor was 43 years old, educated in marine biology, more comfortable with scientific instruments than military strategy. But the war had made him focus on things he'd rather not understand. "How many ships have we lost to these long-range attacks?" he asked. Toyoda stood at attention. 17 major units in the past 6 weeks, Your Majesty. 3 battleships, 8 cruisers, 6 destroyers, all destroyed by radar-directed gunfire at ranges exceeding 25 kilometers. And our countermeasures? We have none. Your Majesty, we lack the technological capability to develop radar systems comparable to American equipment. Our scientists estimate we are at least 5 years behind American research, perhaps more. Hirohito set down the report. 5 years, by which time the war will be over. Yes, Your Majesty. And the spirit of our forces. How does this affect morale? Toyoda chose his words carefully. Our sailors still fight bravely, Your Majesty, but they are beginning to understand that bravery is not sufficient. When you can die without warning, without seeing your enemy, without any opportunity to fight back, the concept of honorable combat becomes meaningless. Are you suggesting our warriors are losing faith in Bushido? I am suggesting that Bushido was developed for a different kind of warfare. When samurai fought with swords, courage and skill determined victory. When we fight against enemies who can see us while remaining invisible themselves, courage becomes... Toyota paused. Irrelevant. The word hung in the air, dangerous, almost treasonous. But true. Hirohito stood, walked to the window. Outside, Tokyo was preparing for another bombing raid. The city that had once seemed invulnerable now lived in constant fear of B-29s that flew too high to shoot down dropping incendiaries that burned entire neighborhoods. "What would you have me do, Admiral?" "Your Majesty, I cannot counsel surrender. That decision is beyond my authority. But I can tell you that we are losing this war not because our warriors lack courage, but because our enemies have transformed warfare itself. They have made war into an industrial process, and we cannot compete with American industry. Then we will fight with what we have, with our spirit, with our determination. Spirit cannot stop radar-guided shells, Your Majesty. No, but it can make our deaths meaningful, can demonstrate to the world that Japan does not surrender, that we will fight to the last man if necessary." Toyota bowed. He'd expected this response. The emperor was trapped by the same culture that trapped every Japanese leader, the inability to acknowledge defeat without losing face. The belief that dying was preferable to surrendering. But Toyota was also a practical man, a naval officer who understood statistics. And the statistics said that Japan had already lost. Every day the war continued just meant more deaths, more widows, more orphans, more families destroyed. Was that honor? Or was it just pride masquerading as principle? He didn't voice these thoughts. Couldn't. His culture didn't permit that kind of questioning. So he bowed and left and returned to his office to write more orders that he knew were pointless. Back in the United States, the factory workers were beginning to understand the human cost of their precision. December 15, 1944. Naval Gun Factory, Washington, D.C., 1200 hours. Mary Chen sat in the cafeteria reading the newspaper. Front page story about Iowa's successful engagement. About how American radar technology was revolutionizing naval warfare. About how precision manufacturing was giving U.S. forces an insurmountable advantage. The article mentioned that shells manufactured at the Naval Gun Factory had achieved a 50% hit rate at 19 miles in darkness. Mary had made some of those shells. Her hands, her precision, her refusal to accept tolerances outside specification. Proud of yourself. Susan sat down with her lunch tray. Should I be? We're winning the war, Mary, because of us. Because every shell we make is perfect. Perfect at killing. Perfect at ending this war faster. Which means fewer American boys die, including my brother and yours. Mary folded the newspaper. You know what bothers me? The article talks about precision strikes and technological superiority and minimal ammunition expenditure. But it doesn't mention the Japanese sailors who died. It doesn't talk about them at all. Like they're not people. Like they're just targets. They are just targets. They bombed Pearl Harbor. They're trying to kill Americans. I know, and I know what we're doing is necessary. But necessary doesn't mean good. It just means we don't have better options. Susan was quiet. She'd been thinking about this too. Hard not to when you spent 10 hours a day making weapons. When your hands shaped the metal that would end lives. When your precision enabled death. You want to know what really scares me? Susan said quietly. It's how normal this feels now. 6 months ago, I couldn't believe I was working on weapons. Now I eat my lunch and talk about tolerance specifications like I'm making car parts. I've normalized killing. And I don't know how to unnormalize it. Mary nodded. After the war, we'll go back to making civilian goods, cars, appliances, whatever. But we'll remember this. We'll remember that we know how to make death precise. And that knowledge doesn't go away. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we're supposed to remember, so we never do this again. Or maybe we remember how good we were at it. And the next time there's a war, we're even better." They finished lunch in silence, went back to their machines, made more shells, each one perfect, each one capable of killing dozens, each one a testament to American industrial excellence and American moral ambiguity. That evening, Frank Morrison failed his first inspection in 30 years. December 15th, 1944. Naval Gun Factory, Inspection Department. 1830 hours. Frank held the shell under the light. Saw the microscopic crack in the casing. Just a hairline. Barely visible. Would probably survive firing. Probably wouldn't explode in the breach. Probably wouldn't kill the gun crew. Probably. "Frank." Tom Chen stood beside him. "That shell okay?" Frank stared at the crack. Thought about his son on Iowa. About the gun crews who trusted that every shell was perfect. About the families who would receive telegrams if he approved a defective round. "No, it's rejected." "Are you sure I don't see anything?" "It's there. Look closer." Tom examined the shell. Couldn't see the crack. "Frank, we're behind quota. If we reject shells for imperfections this minor, then we reject them. Better to be behind quota than to kill our own boys." "That's not your decision to make." "Yes, it is. I'm the inspector. My name goes on the approval stamp. If this shell explodes in the breach, it's my fault. My responsibility. My son, who maybe dies because I was worried about quotas." Tom was silent. He'd known Frank for 15 years, had never seen him this shaken. "What's wrong, Frank? Really?" Frank set down the shell. His hands were trembling. "I keep thinking about the men on the other end, Japanese sailors, men who die because I made sure these shells are perfect. I'm good at my job, Tom, really good. And every shell I approve kills someone, and I can't stop thinking about that anymore. We're at war." "I know, and I know my job is necessary. But knowing something is necessary doesn't make it easy, doesn't make it right, just makes it unavoidable." Tom put his hand on Frank's shoulder. "Go home. Take tomorrow off. Spend time with your wife. Remember why you're doing this." "What if I'm doing it just because I don't know how to stop?" Tom had no answer. He watched Frank leave, watched a good man crumble under the weight of precision. Under the realization that excellence in wartime meant excellence at killing. Later that night, Tom would go home and find a letter from his son Robert. Brief. Censored. Just saying he was safe and thinking of home. Tom would read that letter and wonder if his son was operating the radar that guided shells his father's factory produced. Would wonder if they were collaborating on death without knowing it. Would wonder if that made it better or worse. He never found out. The war kept its secrets. The factory kept producing. And the connection between fathers and sons remained invisible like the radar waves that turned men into targets. Across the Pacific in the POW camp, Soichiro was learning that survival sometimes meant collaborating with the enemy. December 20th, 1944. POW camp. Leyte. 0900 hours. Captain Warren returned with a different request. "Captain Soichiro, we need your help." "With what?" "We're planning operations against your remaining fleet. We need to understand Japanese radar capabilities, detection ranges, countermeasures, tactics." Soichiro laughed. Harsh. "You want me to betray my navy to help you kill more of my countrymen? I want you to help end this war faster. Every day it continues, more people die, Japanese and American. If you help us understand your tactics, we can neutralize your forces more efficiently, which means less overall bloodshed. Efficient killing. That's your answer to everything. It's the only answer that works." Warren leaned forward. "Look, I understand your position. You're an officer. You have honor. You don't want to betray your country, but your country has already lost. You know it. I know it. The only question is, how many more people die before your leaders admit it?" Soichiro was silent. Warren was right. Japan had lost. The only question was when they'd acknowledge it, and how many lives would be wasted in the meantime. If I help you, what happens to my men? They survive the war, get repatriated when it's over, go home to their families. And if I don't, the war continues. More operations, more engagements, more Japanese ships destroyed by weapons they can't detect or fight, more sailors dying in the dark. Soichiro closed his eyes, thought about Yamada, about the 37 survivors from Kumano who trusted him, about the thousands of other Japanese sailors still at sea, still fighting, still believing that courage mattered. What do you want to know? Warren opened his notebook. Everything. And Soichiro talked, told them about Japanese radar limitations, about detection ranges and countermeasures, about tactics and communication protocols. He betrayed every technical secret he knew, not because he wanted to, but because Warren was right. The war was lost, and every day it continued just meant more deaths. Was it treason, or was it mercy disguised as betrayal? Soichiro would spend the rest of his life wondering. Later that night, alone in his barracks, he wrote in a journal the Americans had provided. December 20th, 1944. Today I betrayed my country to save my men. I told the Americans everything. Every weakness, every limitation, every tactic we used to compensate for inferior technology. I am a traitor. But I am a traitor who will go home knowing that the information I provided shortened the war. That the deaths I enabled today prevented more deaths tomorrow. Is that morally acceptable? I don't know. But it's the choice I made, and I will carry it for the rest of my life. Along with the memory of 800 men who died because they trusted that courage mattered more than radar. They were wrong, and I helped prove it. He closed the journal and tried to sleep. Failed. Kept seeing the faces of his crew. Kept hearing their voices. Kept wondering if they would forgive him or curse him. He never found out. Most of them were dead. And the dead don't judge. They only accuse by their absence. By Christmas 1944, the pattern was clear. American technological superiority had fundamentally changed naval warfare. Japanese ships were being destroyed at unprecedented rates. American casualties were declining. The war was being won not by courage or determination, but by mathematics and industry. And the men who made it possible, the engineers, the factory workers, the radar operators, the gun crews, were learning to live with what they'd become. Were learning that efficiency wasn't the same as morality. That winning wasn't the same as being right. That you could do everything correctly and still be haunted by the results. In Tokyo, Admiral Toyota wrote his final assessment. We have been defeated not by American warriors, but by American scientists. Not by courage, but by computers. Not by fighting spirit, but by industrial capacity. Future wars will be won by whoever has the better technology, and humanity will be diminished by every improvement we make. In Washington, Dr. Bush signed off on the next generation of weapon systems, radar-guided missiles, proximity fuses, electronic countermeasures, and wondered what he'd unleashed. In the naval gun factory, Mary Chen and Susan Rodriguez and thousands like them kept making perfect shells and tried not to think about what perfect meant. And aboard Iowa, Chen and Torres and Jackson and Morrison kept doing their jobs and tried to remember why they'd joined the Navy. Tried to hold on to their humanity while participating in industrial killing. Tried to believe that necessary was close enough to right. They were all complicit. All trapped in a system too large to resist. All learning that modern war didn't require monsters. It just required competence, precision, the willingness to do your job without asking too many questions. And that perhaps was the most terrifying lesson of all, that ordinary people doing ordinary work could produce extraordinary evil. Not through malice, not through hatred, just through excellence applied to the wrong purpose. In the cold December of 1944, as radar-guided shells continued to kill men who never saw them coming, humanity learned what it meant to make murder mathematical, to turn killing into engineering, to perfect death while losing sight of what perfection cost. And in the silence between explosions, in the space between orders and execution, in the gap between action and consequences, some men whispered questions that had no good answers. Questions about duty and morality, about efficiency and humanity, about whether winning was worth what they'd become. The questions remained, unanswered, unanswerable, echoing across an ocean that had witnessed the transformation of war from human endeavor to industrial process, from courage to calculation, from warriors to technicians. The shells kept flying, the ships kept sinking, the war kept grinding forward, and the men who made it possible kept trying to sleep at night, haunted by the knowledge that they'd helped turn killing into science, that their precision enabled death, that their excellence had made murder mathematical. In the darkness, some of them prayed, some of them drank, some of them just stared at ceilings and waited for dawn. But none of them could escape the truth that they'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return, that they'd proven killing could be perfected, that they'd made murder efficient, and efficiency once learned is never forgotten. In barracks and bunkers where men were taught to serve machines, some still whispered of the humanity they'd once known, of the line between soldier and executioner, of the moment when following orders became indistinguishable from abandoning conscience. Those whispers carried weight in the silence between shell bursts, in the hours when radar screens went dark, in the spaces where mathematics couldn't calculate the cost of what they'd become. Those whispers reached Washington in early January, carried in after-action reports and psychiatric evaluations that Naval Command didn't quite know what to do with. January 8, 1945. Bureau of Naval Personnel. Washington, D.C. 0930 hours. Rear Admiral Charles Mason sat across from Dr. Eleanor Hartley, the Navy's chief psychiatric consultant. She'd spent 3 weeks aboard Iowa interviewing crew members, observing operations, compiling data on what she called technological combat stress syndrome. "How bad is it?" Mason asked. Hartley opened her folder. 43% of fire control personnel report symptoms consistent with combat fatigue, sleep disturbances, intrusive thoughts, difficulty eating. But here's what's interesting. They have these symptoms despite never seeing combat in the traditional sense. They never see the enemy, never face direct danger, yet they're experiencing psychological trauma at rates comparable to infantry soldiers. Why? Because they understand what they're doing. They're not just following orders, they're part of a system that kills efficiently and impersonally, and that creates a different kind of stress, the stress of moral injury. Hartley pulled out interview transcripts. Listen to this. Ensign Chen, radar operator. "I feel like I'm playing a video game, except the game pieces are real people, and when I win, they die." Or this one from Seaman Torres, gun loader. "I'm good at my job, really good. And that terrifies me because my job is helping kill people I'll never see." Mason leaned back. "What do you recommend?" "Rotation. Get these men off the ships. Give them shore duty where they're not directly involved in killing. Replace them with fresh crews who haven't—" She paused. "Who haven't started questioning yet. That's not practical. We need experienced operators. The technology is too complex." "Then you'll need to accept that we're breaking these men psychologically, that we're creating a generation of sailors who are excellent at killing, but terrible at living with themselves afterward. Can't you just, I don't know, counsel them, help them cope?" Hartley laughed. No humor in it. "Admiral, I'm a psychiatrist, not a priest. I can't absolve them of guilt they're right to feel. They're participating in industrialized killing. That's morally complicated. And telling them it's okay because they're following orders doesn't help. That's what the Germans said at Nuremberg." "Are you comparing our sailors to Nazis?" "No. I'm saying that when you create systems where ordinary people can kill extraordinary numbers without seeing the results, you create moral problems that don't have easy solutions." She closed her folder. These men are doing what they're told. They're doing it well. But excellence doesn't equal morality. And they're starting to understand that. Mason was quiet. He'd spent 30 years in the Navy, had commanded ships, had ordered men into danger, had always believed that following orders was sufficient justification for any action. Now he wasn't sure. What happens if we don't address this? He asked. Some will cope, some will drink, some will have breakdowns, and all of them will carry this for the rest of their lives. They'll be the men who won the war through technology, and they'll spend decades wondering if winning that way was worth what it cost them. Can you put that in your official report? No, sir. I'll write that crew morale remains high and operational effectiveness is not compromised. Because that's what you need to hear. But off the record? She looked at Mason. We're creating ghosts. Men who look alive but are haunted by what they've done. And I don't know how to fix that. After Hartley left, Mason sat alone in his office thinking about the implications. The Navy had spent billions developing technology that made killing efficient, had trained thousands of men to use it, had created a system where death came from calculations instead of courage, and now they were discovering that efficiency had a cost the accountants hadn't calculated. But the war continued, and so did the operations. January 12, 1945, USS Iowa, South China Sea, 0445 hours. Chen sat at his radar station tracking a Japanese convoy. 4 cargo ships, 2 destroyer escorts, 18 miles away. The convoy didn't know Iowa was there. Didn't know that in 12 minutes they'd start dying. Contact confirmed, Chen reported. His voice was flat, professional, empty. Bearing 185, range 31,000 yards, course 090, speed 12 knots. In fire control, Commander Wade prepared the firing solution. He'd done this 17 times since October. 17 successful engagements. 0 misses. His accuracy rate was unprecedented in naval history. He felt nothing about it anymore. Solution computed, Murphy reported. Ready to fire on command. Wade picked up the phone to the bridge. Bridge fire control, solution valid, awaiting orders. Morrison answered. Stand by fire control. He turned to McCree. Sir, intelligence says those cargo ships might be carrying POWs. British prisoners from Singapore, forced laborers. McCree's jaw tightened. Confirmed. No, sir. Intelligence is unclear. Could be military supplies. Could be civilians. Could be prisoners. We don't know. Range to target. 31,000 yards. We need to fire in the next 4 minutes or they'll be out of range. McCree looked at the plot, at the radar contacts that represented ships. Maybe full of enemy supplies. Maybe full of prisoners who'd been tortured for years and were finally being moved to safety. Maybe both. He had 4 minutes to decide whether to risk killing Allied prisoners or let enemy supplies reach their destination. Captain. Morrison's voice was soft. What are your orders? McCree closed his eyes. Thought about the calculations, the probabilities, the acceptable losses, the greater good. All the phrases that made killing easier to justify. Stand down. Let them pass. Sir? I said stand down, Lieutenant. We're not firing on a target when we don't know what we're shooting at. Morrison relayed the order. In fire control, Wade felt something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. Gratitude that he didn't have to fire. That he didn't have to add more ghosts to the collection that visited him at night. But the relief was temporary. 2 hours later, they received intelligence that the convoy had been carrying military supplies. Ammunition, food, equipment that would be used to kill Americans at Okinawa. McCree had made the wrong choice. Had let enemy resources escape because he'd hesitated. Because he'd allowed morality to interfere with efficiency. Sir? Morrison found him on the bridge afterward. You couldn't have known. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is that I hesitated. that I let my conscience override my duty, that I chose possible prisoners over definite military advantage. And now American soldiers will face those supplies at Okinawa. Will die because I wasn't willing to take the risk. Or you saved Allied prisoners. We still don't know. No, we don't. And that's the problem. Modern warfare gives us the power to kill from incredible distances, but it doesn't give us the wisdom to know when we should. We have perfect weapons operated by imperfect men, and I'm starting to think that combination is fundamentally flawed. Morrison had no response, because McCrea was right. They had the technology to kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. But they didn't have the clarity to know when killing was justified, when it was necessary, when it crossed the line from warfare to murder. Meanwhile in Tokyo, the endgame was becoming clear. January 15th, 1945. Imperial Palace. Emergency Cabinet Meeting. 1400 hours. Prime Minister Kuniaki Koiso presented the naval losses. In the past 3 months, we have lost 53 major surface combatants. 41 of those were destroyed by long-range radar-directed fire. American forces can now sink our ships at will from distances we cannot match. What about kamikaze attacks? Foreign Minister Shigemitsu asked. Partially effective. But for every American ship we damage, they destroy 5 of ours. The mathematics are against us. Admiral Toyoda stood. Gentlemen, I must speak frankly. We have lost the naval war. We have lost the air war. We are losing the ground war. The only question remaining is whether we surrender with conditions or fight until there is nothing left to surrender. The room erupted, voices shouting about honor, about Bushido, about the impossibility of surrender, about fighting to the last man. Hirohito raised his hand. Silence fell immediately. Admiral Toyoda, in your professional opinion, can we win? Toyoda met the Emperor's eyes. No, Your Majesty. Can we achieve a stalemate? No, Your Majesty. Then what can we achieve? We can determine how many of our citizens die before we acknowledge reality. We can choose between a death toll of hundreds of thousands or millions, but we cannot change the outcome. The Americans have transformed warfare into an industrial process, and we cannot compete with their industry. Koiso spoke up. Perhaps we can negotiate terms, offer conditional surrender, maintain the imperial system. The Americans will not negotiate, Toyoda said. Why should they? Every day we delay, they grow stronger and we grow weaker. They can afford to wait, to keep bombing our cities, to keep sinking our ships, to keep killing our soldiers, until we have nothing left but surrender. Then we will fight until we have nothing left. War Minister Anami declared. Better to die with honor than to live with shame. Toyoda looked at Anami. Tell that to the mothers whose sons are dying. Tell that to the widows. Tell that to the children who will grow up without fathers because we were too proud to admit defeat. How dare you? I dare because I have watched this war from the beginning. Have seen our best and bravest die. Have received reports of ships destroyed, aircraft shot down, islands lost. Have read the casualty lists and visited the hospitals and attended the funerals. And I am tired of pretending that honor justifies slaughter. The room was silent. No one had ever heard Toyoda speak this way. The careful admiral, the professional officer, now raw with grief and rage. Hirohito spoke quietly. Admiral, what do you recommend? I recommend we sue for peace, immediately. Accept whatever terms the Americans offer. End this war before more lives are wasted. And if they demand unconditional surrender, then we accept. Because unconditional surrender means our people survive, means children grow up, means Japan has a future. Conditional surrender means more deaths, more destruction, more waste. The people will not accept this, Anami said. Then lie to them, Toyoda shot back. Tell them we achieved honorable terms. Tell them the emperor remains. Tell them whatever necessary. But end this war. Koiso stood. This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene tomorrow to continue discussions. As the cabinet filed out, Toyota remained behind. Hirohito approached him. "Admiral, you spoke with great passion today." "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I overstepped." "No, you spoke truth, and truth is rare in war." Hirohito looked tired, old beyond his years. "Tell me honestly, how much longer can we last?" "At current rates, 6 months, maybe less. The Americans are preparing invasion forces. When they land on the home islands, casualties will be catastrophic, on both sides. But ultimately, we will lose, because they have more men, more supplies, more weapons, more everything. And if we surrender now, hundreds of thousands live who would otherwise die. Perhaps millions. The cities remain intact. The culture survives. Japan survives. But our honor, Your Majesty, with respect, honor is a luxury of the living. The dead have no honor, only absence." Toyota bowed. "I have lost too many good men to care about abstract concepts of honor. I care about mothers seeing their sons again, about children growing up with fathers, about Japan having a future worth living in." Hirohito was silent for a long moment. "I will consider your words, Admiral, but I cannot act alone. The cabinet must agree, the military must agree, and they are not yet ready to accept defeat." "Then make them ready, Your Majesty, before the Americans make the decision for us." The meeting ended. Nothing was resolved. The war would continue. But a seed had been planted. The idea that survival mattered more than honor. That pragmatism could be a form of courage. That knowing when to stop fighting required different bravery than knowing when to start. It would take 6 more months. 2 more atomic bombs. Millions more deaths. But the seed would grow. And eventually Japan would surrender. Not because they ran out of courage, but because their leaders finally understood what Admiral Toyota had been trying to tell them since October, that modern war wasn't won by spirit or honor or determination. It was won by mathematics, by industry, by cold efficiency applied with ruthless consistency. And Japan had lost that war long before they admitted it. Back aboard Iowa, the crew was preparing for the invasion of Okinawa, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific, the last major battle before the invasion of Japan itself. February 1st, 1945. USS Iowa. Briefing room. 0800 hours. McCree addressed his officers. "Gentlemen, we will provide fire support for the Okinawa landings. Our primary mission is counter-battery fire. The Japanese have artillery emplacements throughout the island. Our job is to destroy them before they can target our landing forces." "Range to shore?" Wade asked. 12 to 15 miles, well within radar range. We'll be using forward observers to call fire missions, but the Mark 8 will do the heavy lifting." Questions. Morrison raised his hand. "Sir, are we expecting kamikaze attacks?" "Yes. Intelligence estimates heavy kamikaze activity. The Japanese are calling Okinawa their last stand. They'll throw everything at us, including themselves." "And our countermeasures?" "We have proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, radar-directed 40mm guns, combat air patrol, but some will get through, they always do." The officers were silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Kamikazes had sunk or damaged dozens of American ships, killed thousands of sailors. The Japanese were willing to die to inflict damage, and that kind of desperation was terrifying. "One more thing," McCree said. "Some of you have expressed concerns about the nature of our operations, about the psychological effects of long-range engagement. I want you to know that I hear you, that I understand. But I need you to understand something too. Every shell we fire saves American lives. Every target we destroy means fewer casualties on the beaches. What we do isn't glorious. It isn't honorable in the old sense, but it's necessary. And necessity sometimes requires us to do things that trouble our conscience. Can you live with that?" No one answered, because the question wasn't really asking for a response. It was stating a fact. They would live with it, or they wouldn't serve. Those were the only options. After the briefing, Chen found Torres in the mess hall. "You ready for Okinawa?" Chen asked. Torres shrugged. "As ready as I'll ever be. You?" "I don't know. Part of me wants it to be over. Part of me dreads what over means. How many more people do we have to kill before this ends?" "All of them, I guess, until they surrender. And if they don't, then we keep killing, until there's no one left to fight. That's what war is, right? Killing until one side gives up." Chen looked at his coffee. "When I was a kid, my dad told me about World War I, about trenches and gas attacks and men dying by the thousands for a few yards of mud. I remember thinking how barbaric that was, how primitive, how glad I was that we'd evolved beyond that kind of slaughter. And now I realize we haven't evolved. We've just gotten more efficient. We kill more people faster, from greater distances, with less risk to ourselves. But it's still slaughter. We've just made it industrial." Torres was quiet. Then, "My priest wrote me a letter, asked if I was maintaining my faith, asked if I was praying, asked if I was remembering that God loves all people, even enemies." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. How do I explain that I'm part of a machine that kills people I'll never see? That I'm good at it? That I've stopped thinking of them as people, because thinking of them as people makes it impossible to do my job? That I've chosen efficiency over empathy, because empathy gets Americans killed? Do you think God forgives that? I don't know. But I know I can't forgive myself. And I don't think I ever will. Even after the war ends. Even when I'm home. I'll remember that I was part of this. That I helped turn killing into mathematics. And that knowledge will be with me forever." Chen nodded. He understood. They all did. The crew of Iowa. The factory workers in Washington. The engineers at Aberdeen. The admirals in Tokyo. Everyone involved in this war understood at some level that they'd crossed a line. That they'd made war too efficient. That they'd transformed human conflict into industrial process. And that transformation was irreversible. The technology existed. The knowledge existed. The systems existed. And they would never go away. Would only improve. Would only become more precise, more deadly, more efficient. Future wars would be fought with better radar, faster computers, longer range weapons, and the distance between killer and killed would grow wider. Until eventually men would sit in air-conditioned rooms thousands of miles away pressing buttons that launched missiles at targets they'd never see, killing people they'd never meet, and going home for dinner without blood on their hands, but with ghosts in their heads. That was the future Iowa's guns had created. Not intentionally, not maliciously, just inevitably. Because that's what humans do. We improve our tools. We perfect our systems. We make everything more efficient. Even killing. Especially killing. On March 18, 1945, Iowa arrived off Okinawa. The island was smoking, burning, dying. American forces were ashore fighting block by block, cave by cave against an enemy who refused to surrender. Who chose death over defeat? Who believed that dying for the emperor was the highest honor? Iowa's guns fired 312 rounds during the Okinawa campaign. Destroyed 183 artillery positions, leveled fortifications, killed thousands, saved thousands, became part of the machine that ground the Japanese defense into dust. And when it was over, when the island was secured and the casualties counted, Chen and Torres and Morrison and Wade and McCree and all the rest sat in the silence and wondered if winning felt different from losing. If the dead cared whether they died honorably or efficiently. If mathematics could justify murder, or if murder was still murder regardless of how precisely you calculated it. They never reached a conclusion. Because some questions don't have answers. They only have consequences. And the consequences of what they'd done would echo for generations, would shape how future wars were fought, would determine how humanity killed itself, would prove that progress in warfare wasn't measured by increased honor or decreased suffering, but by improved efficiency and expanded distance between killer and killed. The Age of Warriors had ended on October 24, 1944, when Iowa's shells had struck an enemy 19 miles away. But it took until April 1945 for everyone to understand what that meant. That courage was obsolete, that honor was optional, that the only thing that mattered was technological superiority applied with mechanical precision. By then, it was too late to go back. The threshold was crossed, the future was determined. And all that remained was living with what they'd created. The ghosts they'd made. The humanity they'd traded for efficiency. The price of making murder mathematical. In the wreckage of Okinawa, amid the rubble and the silence, someone found a photograph of a Japanese soldier holding his child. The photo was burned at the edges, stained with blood, but the faces were clear. A man and a daughter smiling at something beyond the frame. No one knew who they were. No one knew if they'd survived. But someone kept the photograph, tucked it into their pocket, carried it like evidence of something that mathematics couldn't calculate. That even in battles won by radar and computers and shells that flew 19 miles through darkness, what was destroyed was human. Individual. Irreplaceable. And that knowledge, that haunting, terrible knowledge, was the cost of victory, measured not in casualties, but in what was lost inside the men who survived. That photograph traveled home with Seaman Jackson. He never showed it to anyone. Never spoke about where he'd found it or why he'd kept it. Just carried it in his wallet for the next 43 years until the day he died. His daughter found it while sorting his belongings. Asked her mother what it meant. Her mother didn't know. Just said that some men came home with medals. Others came home with ghosts. Her father had carried both. August 15, 1945. USS Iowa, Tokyo Bay. 1200 hours. The war was over. Officially. The Emperor had spoken on the radio. Surrender was coming. Japan had stopped fighting. Chen sat at his radar station watching the screen. Empty ocean, no targets, no threats, no reason to calculate firing solutions or track contacts or prepare for engagement. The machine was silent. Finally. We won. Torres appeared in the doorway. He'd been drinking. They all had. The ship's stores had been opened. Beer rations distributed. Men celebrating in the mess hall, on the deck, everywhere. Celebrating survival. Celebrating victory. Celebrating the end. Yeah. Chen didn't look up from the screen. We won. You don't sound happy. I am. I think. I'm just trying to figure out what we won. What it cost to get here. Torres sat down. We won the war. We saved the world from fascism. We protected democracy, all the things they told us we were fighting for. And how many people did we kill to do that? I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, more. Do you remember any of their names? Torres was quiet. No, I don't even remember their faces. Never saw them. That's what bothers me, Chen said. We killed more people than I can count. But I don't know a single name. Don't know who they were, what they wanted, what they believed. They're just numbers on casualty reports, radar contacts we destroyed, problems we solved. Would it be better if we knew? I don't know. Maybe. At least then they'd be real. At least then we'd have to acknowledge that we killed people, not targets. Morrison entered the CIC. He'd been drinking too. His uniform was rumpled. His eyes were red. Ensign Chen, you're off duty. Go celebrate with the others. I'm not really in a celebrating mood, sir. Neither am I. But we owe it to the men who didn't make it. The boys who died believing this mattered. Who thought their sacrifice meant something. Did it? Chen asked. Did it mean something? Or did we just kill more efficiently than the other side? Morrison didn't answer immediately. He walked to the radar console, put his hand on the equipment that had guided so many shells to so many targets. My father works in the factory that makes our ammunition. I didn't know that until last month. He wrote me a letter, said he'd been inspecting shells for 3 years, that maybe some of the rounds I'd helped fire were ones he'd approved, that we'd been collaborating on death without knowing it. How did that make you feel? Sick, proud, confused. All of it at once. He's a good man, doing his job. I'm a good man, doing my job. But together, we killed thousands. And I don't know if being good people doing necessary jobs absolves us of that, or if it makes it worse. Because if good people can kill this efficiently, what hope is there? Chen stood. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. I think we broke something, not just in the Japanese, in ourselves. We proved that killing doesn't require hatred or anger, or even personal courage. Just competence. Just following procedures. Just being good at your job. And I think that's going to haunt us, all of us, for the rest of our lives. You're probably right, Ensign. But we still have to live with it. Have to go home. Have to try to be normal men after doing abnormal things. Have to pretend that we're the same people who left. Even though we're not. Even though we can't be. Torres spoke up. What do we tell people? When they ask what we did in the war. Morrison thought about it. We tell them we served. That we did our duty. That we're grateful to be home. We don't tell them about the radar contacts that became corpses, about the efficiency of our killing, about the nights we can't sleep because we're haunted by faces we never saw. We keep that to ourselves. Because they wouldn't understand, can't understand. Unless you've turned killing into mathematics, you can't grasp what it does to you. September 2nd, 1945. USS Missouri, Tokyo Bay. 0900 hours. The surrender ceremony was happening on Missouri, not Iowa. But Iowa's crew lined the rails to watch, to witness history, to see the moment when Japan officially gave up, when the war definitively ended. Chen watched through binoculars as Japanese officials climbed aboard Missouri, saw Foreign Minister Shigemitsu sign the surrender documents, saw General MacArthur accept them, saw the war end with signatures instead of shells. That's it, Torres asked. That's how it ends with paperwork. That's how everything ends, Chen replied. All those battles, all those deaths, all that technology and strategy and effort. And it comes down to old men signing papers on a ship. Seems anticlimactic. That's because the real ending already happened. Happened months ago, maybe years ago. The moment Japan realized they couldn't win. The moment they understood that American industry was unstoppable. The signing is just formality. The war ended when they stopped believing they could fight technology with courage. Wade joined them at the rail. He'd been drinking heavily since August. Everyone knew. No one mentioned it. You boys ready to go home? Yes, sir. They answered together. You know what scares me about going home? Wade didn't wait for an answer. That I'll be good at civilian life. That I'll get a job, get married, have kids, do all the normal things. And I'll be good at them because I learned to be good at killing. Because the same precision that made me an excellent fire control officer will make me an excellent engineer or manager or whatever. And no one will know that my competence was forged in death. That I'm only disciplined because I learned to follow procedures that killed thousands. That everything I am is built on a foundation of corpses. Sir, you can't think like that. Why not? It's true. The war made us, shaped us, turned us into efficient machines, and we'll carry that forever. We'll be the men who proved that killing could be perfected, that mathematics could triumph over morality, that technology could make murder clean. We also proved that democracy could defeat fascism, Morrison said. He'd approached without them noticing. That free people fighting for something they believe in are stronger than enslaved people fighting because they're told to. That matters, Commander. Has to matter. Does it? Because from where I stand, we won because we had better factories, better engineers, better resources, not better values, not better beliefs, just better production capacity. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore, Lieutenant. I just know that I'm tired, that I want to go home, that I want to forget what I did here. But I know I never will. None of us will. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Admiral Toyota was preparing his final report to the Emperor. A document that would never be made public. A confession that would be sealed for 70 years. September 5th, 1945. Imperial Palace, Tokyo. 1400 hours. Toyota knelt before Hirohito. The formality felt hollow now. The war was over. The Emperor's divinity was being questioned. The old order was collapsing. But protocol remained, because protocol was all they had left. Your Majesty, I have completed my analysis of the naval war. Speak freely, Admiral. There is no point in discretion now. Toyota opened his folder. We lost because we believed in courage over calculation, because we thought warrior spirit could overcome industrial superiority, because we refused to acknowledge that modern war is won by factories, not fighters. We lost because we were fighting a 19th century war while the Americans were fighting a 21st century one. Could we have won? No, Your Majesty, not after 1942. Perhaps not ever. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by a factor of 10 to 1. They could build ships faster than we could sink them, planes faster than we could shoot them down, weapons faster than we could counter them. And they had technology we couldn't match. Radar, computers, fire control systems that turned killing into science. We had courage. They had mathematics. And mathematics won. What is the lesson? That future wars will be fought by machines, not men. That the nation with superior technology will always triumph over the nation with superior spirit. That courage is obsolete. That honor is irrelevant. That the only thing that matters is industrial and technological capacity. It is a bitter lesson, Your Majesty, but it is true. Hirohito was silent. Then, what do we tell our people, the families of the dead, the widows and orphans? Do we tell them their sons and husbands and fathers died for nothing? That their sacrifice was meaningless because we were fighting a war we couldn't win? We tell them their sacrifice was not meaningless, that they fought bravely, that they died with honor, that they did everything we asked of them. We just don't tell them that everything we asked was insufficient, that no amount of courage could overcome the technological gap, that they were doomed from the start. Is that not a lie? Yes, Your Majesty, but it is a necessary one, because the truth that we sent them to die in a war we knew was unwinnable is too heavy for grieving families to bear. Hirohito stood, walked to the window. Outside Tokyo was rubble, burned, broken, occupied by American soldiers who walked the streets like conquerors. Admiral, I will ask you one more question, and I want complete honesty. Could we have negotiated peace earlier, before the atomic bombs, before Okinawa, before all the deaths in the final months? Toyota met the Emperor's eyes. Yes, Your Majesty. Then why didn't we? Because pride is harder to surrender than territory. Because admitting defeat requires different courage than facing death. Because we valued honor over survival. And because ultimately we cared more about how history would judge us than how many of our people would live to see that history written. You are saying I am responsible for those deaths. I am saying we all are, Your Majesty. Every leader who chose pride over pragmatism. Every general who ordered attacks knowing they were futile. Every admiral who sent ships to certain destruction because retreat seemed dishonorable. We all carry those deaths, and we will answer for them. If not to tribunals, then to our conscience. If not to history, then to the ghosts that will visit us until we die. Hirohito dismissed Toyota. Alone in his study, the Emperor sat at his desk and began writing. A document that would also be sealed for decades. A confession, an apology, an acknowledgement that he'd failed his people. That pride had cost millions of lives. That the war could have ended sooner if he'd had the courage to surrender earlier. He wrote for 3 hours. When he finished, he sealed the document, marked it to be opened in the year 2015. hoped that future generations would learn from his mistakes, doubted they would. Across the Pacific, the men of Iowa were preparing to go home, but home felt foreign now, distant, like a place they'd heard about but never actually visited. October 15, 1945, USS Iowa, San Francisco Bay, 0800 hours. The ship pulled into port. Families waiting on the dock, wives, children, parents. Banners reading, "Welcome home, heroes." Bands playing, people cheering. America celebrating its victorious warriors. Chen stood on deck looking at the crowd, searching for his parents. Found them near the back. His father, Tom Chen, from the Naval gun factory, waving frantically. His mother crying. They were proud, excited, grateful their son had survived. He wondered if they'd still be proud if they knew what he'd done. If they knew he'd helped kill thousands. If they knew he'd become expert at turning people into statistics. If they knew that their son had learned to sleep at night despite having blood on his hands that only he could see. "You see your family?" Torres asked. "Yeah, you. Over there, my mom, my sisters. They're crying. Happy tears, I think." "You gonna tell them about what we did?" "No. What would I say? Hey Mom, I loaded shells that killed people I never saw. I'm really good at murder. Pass the potatoes." "No. I'll tell them I served. That I'm proud. That I'm glad to be home. And I'll keep the rest locked away. Because they don't need to carry what I carry." Jackson approached. He'd gotten drunk the night before, was still half drunk now. "You know what's funny? They're calling us heroes. But I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I survived something terrible, like I was part of a machine that ground people up. And the fact that my machine won doesn't make me feel noble, just lucky." "What will you tell people?" Chen asked. "That I was in the Navy, that I served on a battleship, that I saw action in the Pacific. And if they press for details, I'll change the subject. Because the details are that I helped kill people efficiently. And that's not something you say at dinner parties." The gangplank lowered. Men started filing off, reuniting with families, crying, laughing, being normal again. Or trying to be. Chen was one of the last to leave. He walked down the gangplank slowly. His father rushed forward, hugged him. His mother kissed his face. They were saying something, but he couldn't hear it over the crowd noise. Or maybe he was hearing it, but not processing it. Because part of him was still on the ship. Still at the radar console, still watching contacts disappear from the screen and knowing he'd helped make them disappear. Knowing he'd turned human beings into radar ghosts. Knowing he'd carry that forever. "I'm so proud of you," his father said. "You served your country. You did your duty. You're a hero." Chen looked at his father, at the man who'd inspected shells, who'd made sure every round was perfect, who'd enabled the killing from a factory floor half a world away. Did his father know? Did he understand that they'd been partners in death? That his precision inspection and Chen's radar operation had combined to kill thousands? He wanted to ask, wanted to connect, wanted to share the burden. But he couldn't, because his father looked so proud, so happy, so relieved, and telling him the truth would shatter that, would force him to confront what his work had really meant, would make him carry the weight that Chen carried. So Chen just hugged his father and said, "Thank you," and let the moment pass. Let the opportunity for honesty slip away. Chose to protect his father from the truth. Just like the government was protecting the public from the truth. Just like everyone was protecting everyone from the reality of what the war had actually been. That's how it would work, Chen understood in that moment. The survivors would come home, would be celebrated, would tell sanitized stories that left out the moral complexity, would pretend that war was simple, that victory was clean, that killing was justified. And slowly over years and decades, the truth would fade, would be replaced by narratives of heroism and sacrifice and noble cause. Until eventually, no one would remember what it had actually felt like to turn killing into mathematics, to perfect murder, to prove that good people could do terrible things efficiently and still sleep at night. Except they couldn't sleep at night. Not really. The survivors would carry their ghosts, would wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about radar contacts and firing solutions and men they'd never seen dying in ways they'd never witnessed, would drink too much or work too hard or keep themselves busy enough to avoid thinking about it, would build lives on foundations of unspoken trauma, would pass that trauma to their children in subtle ways, the anger, the silence, the moments when their eyes went distant and they were somewhere else entirely. That was the real legacy of Iowa's guns. Not the tactical victories or the technological advancement or the strategic impact, but the psychological cost. The burden carried by men who'd proven that killing could be industrialized, that death could be perfected, that ordinary people could become extraordinary killers without becoming monsters, just by being good at their jobs, just by following procedures, just by trusting machines. December 7, 1950, 5 years after the war, American Legion Hall, Philadelphia, 1900 hours. The Iowa reunion brought together 53 crew members. Most had married, started families, gotten jobs, built lives. They'd become insurance salesmen and engineers and teachers and mechanics, had returned to civilian life with varying degrees of success. Chen stood at the bar nursing a beer, watching his old crewmates laugh and reminisce, tell stories about liberty calls and storms at sea, and that time Morrison had fallen overboard during a drill. Happy stories, safe stories, stories that avoided the substance of what they'd done. Torres joined him. "You okay?" "Yeah, just weird being back together, seeing everyone civilian." "You having the dream still?" "Every night." "You?" "Yeah, sometimes I'm loading the shells. Sometimes I'm inside them. Sometimes I'm on the Japanese ships watching them come. Always end the same way. I wake up at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep." "You talk to anyone about it?" "My wife knows something's wrong, but she doesn't ask. I think she's afraid of the answer." "Same with my parents. They know I'm not right, but they don't push. Everyone wants to pretend the war is over, that we're fine, that we've moved on." "Have we?" "No. I don't think we ever will. I think we'll carry this until we die. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe that's the price. Maybe the men who perfected killing should be haunted by it." Harrison approached. He'd gained weight, lost hair, looked older than his 48 years. "You boys brooding again." "Just remembering, Chief." "Don't. Remembering doesn't help, just makes it harder." "How do you do it?" Chen asked. "How do you live with what we did?" Harrison sighed. "I work, I drink, I keep busy, and I tell myself that we did what was necessary, that we saved American lives, that the alternative was worse. And sometimes I almost believe it, but mostly I just try not to think about it, because thinking about it doesn't change anything. The dead stay dead, the war stays won, and we stay guilty. So what's the point?" "The point is acknowledgement," Torres said. "The point is not pretending it was simple, not letting history sanitize what we did, not allowing people to forget that winning required us to become something less than human." "More than human," Harrison corrected. "We became efficient, precise, perfect killing machines. That's not less than human. That's more, and that's what's terrifying. That humans can be that good at death." The night continued. More drinks, more stories. Eventually, someone proposed a toast. To the men who didn't make it home. To the boys who died believing this mattered. To everyone who paid the price. They raised their glasses, drank, felt the weight of names they remembered and names they'd never known. American names etched on memorials. Japanese names lost to history. All the dead of all the battles of all the war. The millions who'd died so that 53 men could stand in a Philadelphia bar drinking beer and pretending to be normal. As the reunion ended and they said their goodbyes, Chen and Torres walked out together, stood on the street corner, watched their breath fog in the December cold. "You think it will get easier?" Torres asked. No, but maybe we'll get better at hiding it. Is that enough? It has to be, because it's all we've got. They shook hands, went their separate ways, back to families who loved them but didn't understand them, back to jobs that paid bills but didn't satisfy souls, back to lives that looked normal from outside but felt hollow from within, back to being the men who'd won the war through technology, who'd proven that mathematics could triumph over morality, who'd transformed killing into science and then had to live with what that transformation had cost them. 50 years later, long after most of them had died, historians would write about Iowa's engagement off Samar, would analyze the tactical brilliance, would praise the technological innovation, would celebrate the victory, would add it to the narrative of American triumph in World War II. But they would leave out the ghosts. The trauma, the psychological cost, the nights Chen couldn't sleep, the alcohol Torres consumed trying to forget, the marriages that failed because veterans couldn't explain the distance they carried, the children who grew up with fathers who were physically present but emotionally absent, lost in memories of a war that had ended decades before. They would leave out Frank Morrison dying in 1987, still seeing shells in his dreams, still wondering if his precision had made him complicit in murder or just competent in defense, still unable to answer the question of whether being good at making weapons made him a good man or just a good tool. They would leave out Mary Chen, who quit the factory in 1946 and never touched metalworking equipment again, who raised 3 children and never told them what she'd done during the war, who went to her grave in 1992 carrying the knowledge that her hands had shaped death. They would leave out Dr. Bush, who spent the last years of his life warning about the dangers of technological warfare, who wrote papers arguing that efficiency wasn't the same as morality, who died in 1974, still wondering if his brilliance had saved lives or just made killing easier. They would leave out all the human cost, all the complexity, all the moral ambiguity, because history prefers simple narratives, heroes and villains, victory and defeat, right and wrong. History doesn't have room for the men who won wars while losing themselves, for the ordinary people who became extraordinary killers and then had to spend the rest of their lives figuring out what that meant. But the truth remained carried by survivors in silence, passed down in small ways to children and grandchildren who didn't quite understand why their fathers and grandfathers sometimes went quiet at unexpected moments, why they flinched at certain sounds, why they couldn't watch certain movies, why they drank too much or worked too hard or kept themselves so busy they never had time to think. The truth remained in the nightmares that persisted for decades, in the guilt that couldn't be confessed because no one would understand, in the knowledge that they'd been part of something that had fundamentally changed warfare, that they'd helped create a future where killing would become ever more efficient, ever more distant, ever more mathematical. The truth remained in Captain Soichiro's diary, discovered after his death in 1978, with entries spanning 33 years of trying to understand what had happened to him. Trying to explain why courage hadn't mattered, why his training had been insufficient, why his men had died without even seeing their killer. The truth remained in Lieutenant Commander Williams's final letter to his daughter, written in 1981, just before he died of cancer, trying to explain why he'd seemed distant all those years, why he'd been physically present but emotionally absent, why he'd never quite been able to connect. "I learned during the war to turn people into numbers," he wrote, "and I never fully learned how to turn them back into people. Not even you. Not even your mother. I'm sorry for that. I tried. But some things once learned can't be unlearned." The truth remained in the photograph Jackson carried until he died. The burned, blood-stained image of a Japanese father and daughter. No names, no dates, no context. Just evidence that the radar contacts had been people, that the targets had been human, that the mathematics of murder couldn't erase the humanity of victims. That photograph ended up in a museum in 2018, donated by Jackson's granddaughter, who'd found it among his effects and thought it should be preserved. It hangs now in a display about the human cost of war, Visitors look at it for a moment. Read the placard explaining it was found on Okinawa by an American sailor. Then move on to the next exhibit. Never knowing that Jackson carried it for 43 years as penance. As reminder. As acknowledgement that the war he'd won had destroyed more than enemy ships. That's how the truth survived. Not in official histories or sanitized narratives, but in artifacts and letters and nightmares and silences. In the gaps between what was said and what was experienced. In the distance between public commemoration and private trauma. On October 24, 2044, exactly 100 years after Iowa's guns had fired those 6 shells into darkness, a memorial was dedicated at Pearl Harbor, a black granite wall etched with the names of everyone who'd served aboard Iowa during the war. Chen's name was there, Torres's, Morrison's, Wade's, Harrison's, Jackson's, all of them. Some had died decades before, others had lived into their 90s. But all were remembered, all were honored, all were called heroes. At the dedication ceremony, Chen's grandson gave a speech. Talked about sacrifice and duty and courage. Said all the right things, meant all of them sincerely. He'd grown up hearing stories about his grandfather's service, about the battles and the victory and the homecoming. He'd heard the sanitized version, the version that left out the trauma and the guilt and the nightmares, the version that made war seem clean. But he'd also found, after his grandfather's death in 2001, a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter, 20 pages, single-spaced. Chen's attempt near the end of his life to explain what the war had actually been like, what it had felt like to kill people you couldn't see, what it had cost to be efficient at death, what it meant to carry that for 56 years. The letter ended with a request. Don't let them forget that winning wasn't clean. That victory had a cost beyond the casualty lists. That we weren't heroes. We were just boys who got good at killing and then had to learn to live with that. Remember us honestly. Remember that we were complicated. Remember that we carried ghosts. And remember that every improvement in warfare makes killing easier, but doesn't make it right. Technology advances, but morality doesn't. And someday, someone will have weapons that make our radar-guided shells look primitive, and they'll face the same questions we faced. And I hope they choose better than we did, though I suspect they won't. Because that's what humans do. We perfect our tools, especially our tools for killing. Chen's grandson folded that letter carefully, put it back in its envelope, and wondered if he should share it. Wondered if the world was ready to hear that heroes were complicated, that victory was ambiguous, that the men commemorated on granite walls had carried burdens the monuments didn't mention. He decided to wait, to let the simple narrative persist a while longer. Because maybe the world needed heroes right now. Maybe the complexity could come later. Maybe truth could be gradual. Or maybe he was just doing what everyone did, protecting people from the cost of victory. Sanitizing history to make it bearable, choosing comfortable narrative over uncomfortable reality. Either way, the names remained on the wall, and the ghosts remained with the names, and the truth remained in sealed envelopes and museum artifacts and nightmares that ended only when the last survivor died. And even then, the truth didn't disappear. It just became archaeology, something scholars studied, something students wrote papers about. Something distant enough to analyze without feeling. That was the final legacy of Iowa's guns. Not the tactical victory or the technological innovation, but the proof that killing could be perfected by ordinary people doing ordinary work, that death could be industrialized, that murder could be mathematical, and that everyone involved, from the radar operators to the factory workers to the engineers to the admirals, would carry the weight of that perfection for the rest of their lives. They'd built that perfection with steel and science, but they'd remember it with sorrow and silence. And someday, when all the survivors were gone, and all the letters were discovered, and all the photographs were displayed, humanity would have to confront what Iowa's guns had actually accomplished. Not just sinking enemy ships, but proving that the distance between killer and killed could be extended indefinitely. That technology could replace courage. That efficiency could substitute for morality. And that once those lessons were learned, they could never be unlearned. The shells had flown 19 miles through darkness in 1944. But their impact would echo across generations, would shape how wars were fought, would determine how humans killed each other, would prove that progress in warfare was measured not in decreased suffering, but in increased efficiency. And everyone who'd made that progress possible would carry the knowledge of what they'd done, would bear witness in their silence, and their nightmares, and their unspoken trauma to the cost of making murder mathematical. They'd won the war. They'd saved the world. They'd proven American superiority. But they'd paid for it with pieces of themselves they could never recover, with innocence they could never reclaim, with humanity they'd traded for efficiency. And in the end, after all the parades and ceremonies and monuments that trade humanity for efficiency, morality for victory, conscience for duty, was the real story of what happened when 6 shells flew 19 miles through darkness on October 24, 1944. If you believe their names must be remembered, share this story. And write a name in the comments below of someone who served someone who survived someone who carried ghosts no monument could capture. Let their complexity be remembered. Let their truth be told. Let their sacrifice be honored, not with simple narratives, but with honest acknowledgement of what winning cost them. Because that's the only way we learn. Not by celebrating victory, but by understanding its price.